The Double Shot with your favourite cousins in person, James and Alex Fitzgerald. James has been pacing. He's been on the phone all morning. We finally captured this man for a hot second. Oh, he's trying to. Are you trying to put some sound barriers between us already?
Yes.
You've been here for 2 seconds. You're unbelievable. See,
mate, you're loud.
It's more DIY in this particular studio down here in Melbourne.
And what a great time of the year to be in Melbourne too, isn't it? Just unreal. Springtime in Melbourne.
I know you normally like to capture the grand final time of year to be recording in person as a necessity. But a bit later this year, we had our client Christmas party last night. I saw you working the room.
I was working the room for sure. And interestingly too, coming to Melbourne off the back of the Dan Slide, the 2022 Dan Slide. Dan Andrews, an absolutely comprehensive victory. He picked up more seats than he had in 2018 when he got a massive majority. Jeez,
isn't that crazy? Did you get talking to a few clients about that last night? Did you? I actually didn't. I didn't go down the politics route, thank God.
It's pretty divisive down in Melbourne. Like I think you're sort of either very much a fan or you're very much not.
Yeah.
Probably a product of the big lockdowns. It is amazing that anyone who presides over the biggest lockdown in Australian history, in fact in the world, gets re-elected. Like, I know. Good job to just be able to restore your public image in the first place.
It's just an amazing exercise on politics and just to sort of, I was going to say sit back and watch, but I didn't. I actively voted. But you know what? I don't mind too much. I did, however, join you in a teal electorate.
No, I'm not. Hold on. I'm not in a teal electorate. I'm in a green electorate.
Oh. Well, I'm in a teal electorate. It's green, but it's teal.
Okay,
it's on the teal side of green.
A teal member got up in, what are you? You're South Yarra. I imagine it's called South Yarra, that's it.
Your district or something like that. Anyway, enough about politics. The sun, we've turned it on for you here. The sun is out. We're hours away from surely a few margaritas on a Wednesday. And I want to give welcome. I want to
give a shout out to a listener of the pod, Tim, who talked to me. In fact, enlightened me on and pun intended on what is being mounted as a pretty good and convincing campaign from the Greens to change the daylight savings position in southeast Queensland. Yeah, and the rationale is because you come to a place like Melbourne, sun's going down at 9 o'clock at night, and you just think, how good is this? The position that's being put up by the Greens for southeast Queensland, obviously Queensland, one of the only states in Australia that doesn't participate in daylight savings. Sun's going down at like 6:30 at night. At the moment, up at about 4:30 in the morning.
Yes.
So it's sort of it is very different to what you see in Sydney, Melbourne. The Greens, however, are saying, well, hey, we're all talking about this energy crisis and the fact that our power bills are going up. We maybe even won't have enough energy. What about daylight savings as a potential solution where rather than having that 4:30 till 6:30 slot in the morning where no one's up but the sun is, why don't we tack at least an hour of that on to the end of the day at that sort of 6:30 to 7:30 time slot when people are typically home and using quite a lot of electricity? It's a good argument.
It's very interesting. I for some reason I thought the Greens might actually be anti-daylight savings, but it is very interesting, and I actually got caught up on a little comment thread on LinkedIn of a huge argument. It's amazing how heated this discussion can get. And some very interesting points to say that could actually be better for our economy with our 3 biggest cities on the East Coast all being on the same time zone. But a very interesting spin on energy saving.
It comes up in sort of October, November every year in southeast Queensland as Sydney and Melbourne start to take up the daylight savings. And look, I got to say, it's one of the few topics that you can have a debate on in the modern day, be it polar opposite ends of it, and not take it personally. Daylight savings. I like a good argument where you don't take it personally. In the modern day, doesn't happen often, does it?
No.
People do feel slighted if you've got a different opinion to them at times.
That's a good point, Kaz, because that's what I was grasping at straws on for Sunday after our election, just saying, it's okay. It's all right to have a different opinion. You don't have to get so worked up about it. Now, speaking of savings, not of the daylight variety. I don't know about you, 25,000 text messages of Black Friday sales. I'm over it. And it's not just a day. It's like 2 weeks of Black Friday sales. Did you get any bargains? Did you get any deals? A new bikini for summer, cuz?
No, but the front door at my place has felt like an Australia Post in the past week because my wife has gone nuts. There's that much baby stuff. We've got a baby coming in March.
Yeah.
She's used the opportunity to get a bunch of baby items which were on sale.
Baby bargains.
What I do wonder is, though, I've never received so many emails and texts as I did in the last 2 weeks. I've got no idea how some of these people even have my phone number or email. Do you find that? You're like,
Yes.
how have these people got my number?
Yes, literally, that was the conversation. I had BCF. Boating camping. When have
called
I
you?
ever? Yeah, I've got a text from BCF. It's like the old Fitness First sign-ups. Yeah, if you sign up, you get, and you give us 5 of your friends' numbers and names, we'll give you the first 2 months free. And then you're on every friggin' fitness database ever because all your friends have stitched you up. Is that happening at BCF?
I had a shop. I don't even know what this shop is. I had Kiki K texting me.
No. You love a good diary. Kiki K. That's a dad. I reckon my dad stitched you up there. He's, we'll get him a new diary. Or you just love girly stationery, which is
What's
fine.
Kiki K?
That's okay. That's hilarious.
Hey, I was going to say,
Yes.
I was just on the phone to my brother-in-law who does our tax, my tax. I don't know if he does yours, but
He does my tax, and God bless that man. I actually sent him an email very late last Friday night saying, here you go, buddy. Do with
he
it what
said you
will.
and I sent them in at the same time. We must have both been sort of having maybe something in the pods spurred us to be motivated. Yeah.
No. I'm just a bit short on cash, cuz. I'm thinking, geez, I've got to start buying Christmas presents. I really need it now.
Same.
Hey, what are the chances of me really getting this in and returned before Christmas? Null and void. But at least, we might get a little top up after Christmas, which will get us through those extra couple of days. But, cuz I put in my tax. I'm actually taken aback that you only just put yours in because you're usually pretty organised. But I have to say, this is the latest I've ever done my tax. I've had a bit on, got married, all that jazz.
Congrats.
But I had a bit of a Google.
Ooh,
and in
dangerous.
fact, it is dangerous, but it's relevant. I wanted to bring out that little stinger that JB made for us. What did you Google this week? Stinger it. What did you Google?
What was that?
What did you Google this week? I Googled.
That is incredible.
God, I love that. And do I miss it or what? What did I Google? The ATO. How many tax returns do they get in a year? Like, I'd love to know. Some people haven't done their tax for years, and I'm talking about being 4 months late. ATO receives 14.2 million individual tax returns every year. Holy days. That's about half of our population, a little bit over half. And then I kind of went a little bit further into the Google stratosphere. They issue about 11 million refunds a year. So, some of you aren't getting refunds. Maybe you could be a little bit more tax effective, but wasn't that interesting, Kaz?
Tell you what, imagine the interest that they'd be picking up on sitting on our tax refunds for a whole 12 months.
Do they charge you interest?
No,
Or they just go lend it out elsewhere?
I don't know. They're probably like every house. They'd be no different to a household or business, right? They've got the money sitting in the bank,
Hopefully.
probably earning them interest, which really is our money if you're getting a tax refund.
You do it. I'd do it. I'd do it if I was the ATO.
I'm gonna hit you up with a little stat fact.
Oh,
so we'll get Jordan to
Back-to-back
play the
stingers.
other back-to-back stingers here.
Oh, stat fact.
The stat man.
Stat fact.
As I was in the process of seeing a revolving door of packages turn up to my household, which definitely was the catalyst for motivating me to get my tax return in, I thought something's got to pay for all these things. Australia Post deliver 52 million packages in the week leading up to Christmas.
What?
That's a lot of packages. I don't know
the
how many
week?
they deliver normally, but 52 million. There is 25.5 million Australians. So
That's
we are
7.5 million a day, cuz.
just a tad over two packages per individual person. There you go.
I feel like Australia Post posties need like a Red Bull sponsorship for that one.
They should.
Oof.
There we go.
Wowza.
So last week, Alex, I talked about the fact that 40,000 people per month coming from overseas as migrants into Australia, which is back to the pre-COVID levels that we were used to.
Yeah.
Following on from that, we've seen some articles this week talking about how we've not got our house in order when it comes to processing the visa applications. It was documented that and well publicised that there's 1 million visas in a backlog as of June. We're now starting to see, though, that it is even hard for the most educated people around the world, aren't we?
It's crazy, cuz, and you would sort of think the obvious answer is to bring them in. But, it does point to the question mark of, where are they going to live, and maybe that's a greater issue. But yeah, hundreds of people with internationals with PhDs overseas waiting up to 1, even 3 years for their visas to be approved to come into Australia. So that's amazing. It doesn't matter how educated you are or, what skill set you have. Well, that doesn't, not that it doesn't matter, but it's still a huge challenge for us. And, there's a myriad of issues here, of course, even the Department of Home Affairs not having their own employment in order, whereby they don't have enough employed people. If that's not an oxymoron.
I know, right? Well, there's been uproar for businesses saying it's very hard to get people in, that they're just not seeing the migration that they need. The universities have come out this week and said, well, neither are we, and we're getting people to come across who've got PhDs, some of the most qualified people in the world. And in fact, the University of Sydney has referenced a particular person who's a computer science PhD that's because he hasn't been able to get into the country, they haven't been able to advance this massive research paper on artificial intelligence that they're at the forefront of. This fellow who's got the PhD put in an application in December 8 last year, and he's just been sitting there waiting in the University of Singapore for them to let him in. So one of many examples of some really qualified people that even if you are super qualified, it's taking 12, 24, maybe even 3 years to get into the country, which shouldn't be the case, should it?
Look, it just shouldn't. And I was actually hypercritical of it, but you really sort of made me check myself when you talked about how vacancy rates are so low, and, maybe the government are looking at those greater issues of, maybe we've got to drip feed them in despite the challenges. The Home Affairs Department have granted 152,000 offshore student visas between June and November. So they've actually halved the total waiting number of student visas since June. So they're pushing through students, and maybe there's good amount of student accommodation and students bring in a lot of money to our economy as well. So that could be it. Now, my question is, Kaz, do you think they're flying Qantas when they come over to Australia, the students and the prospective migrants? Do you think they're flying Qantas?
Well, I reckon a decent chunk of them would be. Qantas back in the top 10 in terms of the biggest airlines in the world. Tell me, what do you think's number one biggest airline in the world?
Oh, freak! I have absolutely no idea. Let's just pull it out of the hat. Cathay Pacific.
No. And in fact, Cathay Pacific's not even in the top 10.
You're killing me.
Not even in the top 10. Delta Airlines is the biggest airline in the world, followed by Air China, then United, another American one, and then China Southern.
Wow.
So a couple of big Chinese airlines in the top 5 there. And then Singapore rounding out the top 5, with Qantas jumping into the top 10 in 9th position off the back of a pretty successful last 12 months, I think we'd say.
Insane. I think what the total revenue, 11.7 billion.
Now that's what it's worth. That's what it's worth. I think 1.4 billion is what they're targeting as a profit for this year. So obviously got smashed in the last 2-3 years, but seeming to be bouncing back and defying probably what would be a big challenge for them would be the cost of petrol and oil. But doesn't seem to be worrying them. They're obviously passing it on, and consumers are prepared to pay it. large chunk of which might be coming from overseas.
It's really crazy. I'm almost still quite surprised by that, because maybe it's that they are charging more for flights but doing less of them. But I mean, those numbers seem to be changing weekly.
And monthly, Qantas is upgrading the profit that they're forecasting to make this year. So just last month, they were forecasting a profit of $1.2 billion. They upped it to $1.35 billion last month. So they're getting more and more profitable as the year goes on. Good for them, I guess.
Pretty good for them. Cuz off the back of Qantas having a great couple of months and even year, but it's been a real build-up, hasn't it? Our girl, Gina Rinehart, the richest lady in Australia, and up until, I would say this year, she was one of, if not the biggest private landholder in the world. Apparently, she might be being knocked out there because she's selling off some of her land assets. But Gina had a massive year. So her company, Roy Hill, she owns 70% of, essentially. They had a whopper 2022 financial year. Now stay with me here. This year, they recorded a net profit of $3.2 billion. Now, on face value, they're down. They're down on last year. Last year, they had a record-breaking net profit in 2021 of $4.4 billion.
Wow.
So they're down. But, and I'm taking you back one more year, in 2020, they had a net profit year of $2.2 billion. So they're nearly up after their COVID high of some 50%. Unbelievable numbers, aren't they?
Unbelievable. And it's only one of quite a few companies that she owns. Like, she owns Atlas Iron, which makes obviously iron. They normally make about $1 billion a year as well, and she fully owns that. Doesn't own just 70%. They only made $300 million this year, so it has been a bit of a down year for her, but she's still making a fair bit of kanga, that's for sure.
And interestingly, these numbers are among the biggest financial results for any privately owned company in Australia. They're huge numbers. I mean, some of the public guys would be doing these kind of numbers, and it's a privately owned, or that Roy Hill is privately owned. So amazing. Who else? Who else is doing quite well? Or what are any of these late?
James Hardie. Now, James Hardie, not an overly interesting company on the face of it, if I'm honest, but they are the biggest building supplies business in Australia, and they've had a 22% jump in their profit in the past 12 months. They've made $330 million just for the 6 months to September 30. So obviously they're US listed, so they make their money. They start the year at March each year, but in 6 months they've made $330 million and expecting to make nearly $750 million for the year to date, which is up considerably on the $600 million that they made last year. So a little bit sus on that. There's lots of talk that the building supply costs are going up because of supply chain pressures. Well, James Hardie's making a nice little 22% gain in profit on for their part, that's for sure.
Ooh, that was a bit sly, cuz.
A drive-by.
Now, interesting, bit of a drive-by. Now, interestingly, Crown Resorts, they've gotten smashed. But listen here, like in the realm of a pretty good year. In their last year of public ownership, the company posted revenues of $1.94 billion, up from 1.54 the previous year. But they have been absolutely smashed of late with a $1 billion loss because of all of their gaming regulator fines and levies they've got to pay. You know, and I mean, geez, haven't they copped a lot of bad publicity in the last year and even longer?
They have, but they are seeing quite a lot more people or quite a lot more money being spent through their doors. Crown, for those not familiar, Crown have got 2 casinos, one in Melbourne and one in Perth. The Perth one probably largely unaffected. Perth didn't really have shutdowns last year. Melbourne, obviously, big lockdowns, so certainly wouldn't have been able to open to the extent that they were before the pandemic. They've increased, though, their revenues from just over $500 million to nearly $1 billion in the year, so seemingly getting back to normal and are otherwise profitable if you take out all the bevy of fines that they've been copping over the past 12 to 24 months.
Yeah, so it's a bit bittersweet. Like, you go, oh, well, they've had a $1 billion. Well, there's a bit going on there. They've got a lot of, they're juggling. Now, can we traverse to the common man? I mean, come on, Gina, we love her. Crown, well, whatever. I don't know. We don't really love them, but, they're interesting. James Hardy, well, they're big numbers. All right, let's go to the common man. Are we making more goddamn money? That's what I want to know. Are wages going up for the love of God?
Yes, wages are going up. So wages up. If you so the way that wages get measured is they look at the quarter and then they look at the year. So what was the average Australian earning this time last year? How does that compare to what the average Australian is earning today? Well, the difference is about 3.1%. So wages are up 3.1% on this time last year. And just in the last 3 months alone, up 1%, which is, if you look at a whole year, that'd be 4% in a year. So good news for Aussies who no doubt would be struggling with the increased cost of living and interest rates and all those sorts of things. It will be partially offset by wages going up over the next 12 months as they have in the past 12 months.
I also thought it was quite interesting sort of that nearly half, so 46%, call it, of private sector jobs recorded a change in their hourly wage. So their average increase was up 4.3%. Public sector, a little bit less there, but that's quite a lot, like nearly half of the private sector. That's a lot.
Yeah, it is. And tell me, for the listeners out there, if they want to go about getting a pay rise, you're the expert on that. How do you get a pay rise?
Borrow, beg, and steal. No, God, well, you got to give me more time for that. But we've talked about it many a time.
We might throw that in the quick shots because you did do a pretty good effort on that sometime in the last 24 months.
Jeez.
But yeah, wages going up. Good news. And the other good news, by the way, is that the Reserve Bank have been saying we don't want it to get crazy. We want wages to be going up, but somewhere in that 3 to 4% range. So I think the Reserve Bank would be encouraged by that. At the same time as we started recording, the inflation numbers came out, didn't they? And they were actually surprisingly positive because the economists, who would think it? The economists, their forecast was wrong.
Wow, you're actually on one today, Kaz. But what were you yelling and screaming about at your desk before? Like you were, you're not the most animated at times, but you had a bit of animation about you. What was going on? You were flailing your arms around. You were cursing economists, the poor guys. They're still checked into therapy. What do you have to say?
Well, it all started because the New Zealand Reserve Bank last week put their interest rates up 0.75%.
Okay.
So off the back of that, and the New Zealand economy is very different to Australia, but they've been putting up their rates pretty much consistently since October 2021. They're now at 4.25%, so well above the 2.85 that we're paying. But their inflation's out of control. It's been sitting at 7%, even though they've been putting the interest rates up since October. It's been well ahead of Australia. So off the back of that, all these economists were coming up. For the past week, there's been an article in the papers every day talking about how inflation's going to be jumping from 7.3 to 7.8%, and it's going to cause the Reserve Bank to have to keep putting up rates.
Yep.
Well, no, they got it wrong. Inflation came in at 6.9%. So inflation's actually dropping in Australia like it is in the US and the UK. Okay. So good news on that front, because it's happening at the same time that wages are going up. So I think you'll find the Reserve Bank would be pretty happy with those numbers coming out.
Well, when do they meet next? Because they meet next Tuesday.
Correct.
The last RBA meeting of 2022.
Last pod for the year too?
It's going to be the last of a few different things. Unlike Hamish and Andy, we've put no arbitrage on December 1 onwards, as you've been telling me. But I've also got some other good news, cuz
bring it.
Let's share a bit of the good news. Good news, right? In the realm of interest rates and finance and yada yada, I've actually started, taking a bit of a stand on my portfolio and calling all of the banks. You triggered this, by the way, when you called one of your lenders and said, what the hell's going on? Get me under 6%. And I've actually found out that NAB are the first of the big four to revise a little bit of their servicing calculator. I'm sure they've done it in a few other ways, but where they've increased the proportion of rental income that they use to calculate borrowing capacity to service debt. So essentially, if you're a property investor and you're refinancing a property or you're buying a new investment property, they will now factor in a higher amount of the rent. Some people might be surprised by this or like, what the hell's going on? When banks look at your serviceability, all of them look differently upon what rent they factor in that you're going to get. So say you get $400 a week, or you will get $400 a week on that property once it's rented out and you've settled it. Some banks will account for 50% of that towards servicing debt. Some will account to up to 80%. They're all completely different. And that's why from bank to bank, as we talk about all the time, you will have a different borrowing capacity. So really cool news. NAB have led the way on that. And I do have a couple of loans with NAB. So I called one of my brokers there and I said, is this true? Can you please confirm? And he said, yes. So I thought that was a little bit of good news, cuz, because I think you might be with NAB, or you certainly were at one point. So you might want to be checking up on that one.
And for the listeners out there as well, it doesn't just apply to rents. Every bank's got a different policy on overtime. You know, some people work overtime and they work it fairly consistently, but some banks don't take it into account because it's not, part of a PAYG full-time because it is variable. Commissions can be similar. If you get a base and commissions, sometimes they'll only take into account, 50% of your commissions, for example, which, if you earn commissions, that can hurt. A second job and an ABN if you run a little bit of your income through an ABN.
Right.
All those things, banks have got totally different policies, which is why, as you and I have harped on about for quite some time, a broker is just worth their weight in gold because there's literally hundreds of banks out there with hundreds of different policies.
I can honestly say that in this last 2 weeks, I have not been able to do what I've been able to do with the banks direct without the help of a broker. I'm not kidding. Seriously.
No. And let's talk about build to rent, because we might finish on this.
Oh my!
A lot of talk, and we've discussed it at length in last.
A lot of chit chat.
In the last pod that the vacancy rate in Australia is 1%, down on nearly 2% last year. We've probably got the worst housing shortage and lowest vacancy rate that Australia's ever seen.
Yeah.
Build to rent is a fantastic way to introduce some affordable housing on scale. And what that means is rather than a developer building a big high rise and selling them all to individuals, they rent every single one of them. Haven't seen a lot of it in Australia, but a lot of it it probably started in the UK and it's quite big in the US as well.
Huge.
But starting to come into reality in Australia, isn't it?
Oh, big time. And your big institutional money and your big institutional developers that can build something of that value and hold it because, they're not selling it. They've actually got to carry that debt and have a long-term strategy with it, which is actually very interesting. So you got your Mirvacs, your Lendleases, and more recently your Blackstone. So your big institutional money that are starting to seriously deliver these build-to-rent projects. And it's interesting because it comes at a time where Sydney particularly has a huge housing shortage, and of course that filters into them having a unit shortage. And units, they offer a level of affordability. They can be delivered in places that also have good density, so they're close to public transport, etc. But very recently here in Victoria, Blackstone have just taken over a 437 apartment complex. So we call it build to rent complex, where they've built all of these apartments for the sole purpose of renting. So if you are a renter, you got no intention of buying or, you want to just be a rent investor, you can safely sort of like live in here knowing that you're never going to have to open up for inspections for them to be selling it or, the owners chopping and changing things on you. So you've got a bit more of a long-term structure. But what's really interesting, and sorry if I'm harping on, is these build-to-rent complexes that are built specifically for this purpose, they're almost like a form of a resort, cuz, because they've got all of these facilities on site. They've got, some of them have got gyms, indoor heated pools, or certainly here in Melbourne they're indoor and they're heated, games rooms, like they've got children's playrooms. They are fully geared up. They're dog friendly. Some of them have got co-working. This is a really interesting solution. And it's not the entire solution by any means, but for the housing vacancy crisis, as we try to bring all of those visas in that we're talking about and have all those people coming in and moving here. So, like, it's a serious discussion.
So Realm is, I'm just looking this up actually, Realm Australia, it is their brand for build to rent.
Yeah.
They've got one.
I didn't mention that, sorry. But yeah, that's the brand name. Yep.
And they've got one in Caulfield in Victoria, so that must be where they are. And they've got another one in Kangaroo Point.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Like 437 apartments, like that is huge, isn't it? I mean, a big apartment development where they build to sell, which is your average sort of apartment that we know as an Aussie, that they're like, maybe a couple of hundred at max. That's a big development. But 437, whew, it's huge.
Well, much needed. That probably wraps it up.
Yeah, you want to wrap it up? Okay.
Yeah,
that's
been good. Been good to do this in person. We should do more of it.
I can't see you because you blocked me with all of the soundboards. So it is, I mean, you may as well be in Queensland at this point. But next week, our last pod for the year.
I know.
Tomorrow you'll be playing Christmas tunes. I'm sad that I won't be seeing you tomorrow on your Michael Bublé banter. But gee, do I love Christmas Cuzzy.
Well, he's looking forward to making a triumphant return come tomorrow. In fact, this will be it'll be on the day that the pod drops, 1st of December. So we'll do quick shots later on this week.
We will.
And for those who might be wanting us to cover a certain topic before the end of the year, feel free to let us know because we've left it wide open in terms of what we talk about next week. There is not a thing on the list at the moment, so feel free to send it through. We would love to talk about something that you really want to know, some data and research on before the end of the year.
There is actually one thing that I would like to talk about. And you and I, at the start of the year, I made you actually begrudgingly went along, situation normal with my shit. But at the start of the year, on one of our first pods, I made you and I have a bet on what rental growth would be for this year and housing growth. Ooh. And I've got to dig out those numbers and I've got to reflect. And I think there might have been a little bit of dollars and cents on the line. I
don't reckon that would have aged well for me.
One James Dean Fitzgerald, because Mr. Conservative, aka you, was probably on the conservative side. I would say. So it was national, so you might be saved by a couple of those smaller cities that didn't grow as aggressively as your eastern seaboard, but I'll be digging those out. So if you, the listeners, are interested to know who won that and how wrong we both were, please dial in for the last pod of the year. All
right. About lunchtime, cuz. Hector's Deli awaits.
Hector's Deli, bit of hectic sauce.
See you guys.
See ya. Thanks for listening to another episode of The Double Shot with your favourite cousins, Alex and James Fitzgerald. If you've got a burning question or something we absolutely need to talk about on the pod, please write to us. Both of our emails are in the show notes. For little real estate tidbits and a little bit of banter, okay, a lot of banter, you can follow us on the gram. Our handle is thedoubleshot.podcast. That, my friends, is thedoubleshot.podcast. Until next time, think of us when you sit back and sip your next double shot.